We are pleased to launch the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. We want to ensure we change energy for good, for everyone.
We're not going to end poverty in the world if we don't actually end energy poverty.
Keeping 1.5 degrees alive, we can only achieve that goal if we urgently and dramatically reduce our emissions.
Sub-Saharan Africa, at least I know from my country, 50% of the people living there are off the grid. Exactly. So you can't even begin to talk about energy transition without talking about, giving access.
Oh gosh, thanks guys. Thanks. Well, good morning. I am Elizabeth Yee. I'm the Executive Vice President of Programs here at the Rockefeller Foundation, and it's really exciting to be surrounded by so many friends and family and change makers in the room with us today celebrating this important event. I'm very excited to be joined here with Ayisha Siddiqa, one of the incredible change makers in our community that represents the youth movement. And I think for those who are familiar with us and maybe some who haven't, this is an important moment for the foundation. We have really been focusing on, as an institution, what we can really contribute to in terms of changing the climate and really making sure that we put people at the center of that, because we won't win in this work if we don't. And I'm proud to say, when we looked back at the history of the foundation, we made our first grants on the environment in 1950, really focused on health, and we've continued to build on that since then. But in this moment where we're really thinking about how do we center climate change as the core of what we do, we've really been looking to learn and listen from the communities that we work in, the communities that we support. And so I'm very happy to have you here because, youth is really the core of who inherits the earth and what we need to work towards. And so I wanted to share a little bit of background about you, Ayisha, because I think we have a lot to learn from you and the community that you represent. When I did some watching of your videos and reading last night in preparation for today, and Ayisha's family comes from Pakistan. They come from a town near Faisalabad, if I'm saying that correctly, and it was really, it was sad, but also important to understand the roots of your activism and the focus of your work and how it has affected your family in terms of the floods, in terms of just the challenges that the communities, that your community has been really facing in Pakistan. And so I was excited to see the work that you've been doing to rally the community, the work that you've been doing in college to really bring attention, awareness, and the youth community together around these important issues. And I saw that you created two organizations, the Fossil Free University and Polluters Out. And right now, Ayisha is a research fellow for the Climate Litigation Accelerator Project at New York University's Center for Human Rights and Global Justice. And even more importantly, she was just named one of Time's Women of the Year in March. So that was really incredible. So thank you so much for joining us today. I just thought I would jump in to ask some questions because, as you know, I love to ask questions. So, I mentioned it briefly, Ayisha. I really wanted to hear directly from you. I tried to summarize it, but I wanted to hear from you specifically about what brought you on this climate journey and what the impetus was for getting involved in this work.
Thank you so much for asking. So, hello. I am called Ayisha Siddiqa. Ayisha means one who lives. And I like to introduce myself through my name first because in my community, a child is given a name around 6 to 4 months after they are born. And they are given the name by the individual who is supposed to be their spiritual tether. We are introduced into life, or life with something sweet, and somebody willing to be the guardian of our soul more than our physical and commodifying needs or commodity needs. And it's this kind of tradition is as ancient as the people I come from. So I was born and raised in what would be considered a tribal community in Pakistan, and the tribal identity is important because it's only been recent that we were identified and recognized this title. South Asia is home to some of the largest populations of native and first people, but countries in Asia and Africa do not recognize their indigenous peoples. And to be from a community of that culture means that commerce, money, is only around 50 years old. And it also means that we eat from the land that we grow food on, and we drink water from that very land as well. And all of these things are important because they lead to why I started doing this work. My family, my mom's side of the family, comes from this village called Mochiwala, and it's further up to the more city I grew up in. It's called Jang. For most of our life, our drinking water comes from wells or the river. It directly comes from that. And around 2008, post the war on terror, Pakistan faced a massive emergent energy crisis. We had load shedding or lack of electricity from 12 to 18 hours, and it impacted rural communities as much as it impacted the city. But for rural communities, what it did was lack of energy, especially during the hottest months, meant fans, and even more so, a lot of crops and food rotting. And so the country started investing in dams to try to make most of our river systems and produce renewable energy. And they did that by funding hydrochemical dams alongside the Chenab River, which is the second largest river, and then the Indus River. But those hydrochemical dams were also simultaneously using coal-powered energy. And that coal often leaks into the water. So a neighboring community to mine experienced a lot of kidney disease because they were getting their water straight from the river. And many had to be put on dialysis. And things also got really coincidentally unfortunate for my village as well because illness rapidly increased. Illnesses like tetanus, like polio, like appendicitis, things that could be treated in a country like the United States. Illnesses that aren't really hazardous in a country like the United States. And this isn't just, a unique story for a country or a village like mine. It was happening in many remote places across the country, and it is a reality for so many places in Bangladesh and India as well, and just parts of South Asia. And the whole point of this story being when the air we breathe and the water we drink and the food that we eat becomes polluted, it has direct impacts on health. It has direct impacts on the qualities of life that people are leading. And I lost family members one after another. I immigrated to the US at an early age. My family, my parents are the first of our lineage to ever leave the country. And it was ostensibly a climate migration in addition to a migration out of the move to a more industrialized country where people like mine who have just recently begun working and trading with commerce in order to meet the markets, that meant that we had to learn the lingua franca. we speak a dialect. To learn the lingua franca, then go to university. Then from university, start working in monetary systems. And the thing is, it's a mental development, and I think this is one thing that gets very, very lost. When you trade goods and operate in a system that is immediate, so water is water, and I don't put like an artificial value on it and say our water represents $2, getting to that place of giving this a symbolic value for a community that hasn't done that for hundreds of years is actually really difficult. Because our brains, or the brains of my family members, they don't automatically make the connection the way that our symbolic world operates. And what that does in the long run, actually, is that it creates a difficulty, a barrier, a language barrier even, in starting gaining of wealth and money, because you don't, it's really difficult to fundamentally ascribe value to that symbolic system. And that was what's happening. A lot of the tribal and ancient, not ancient, but communities that have operated without putting artificial values on goods and just have traded goods, it is rather difficult for them to gain wealth very quickly. So yeah, my family immigrated to the US when I was around 8, and in 2013 is when I lost family back in Pakistan due to water pollution, but I live on Coney Island. I don't know how many of you are from New York City. I live around 1,000-ish feet away from the Atlantic Ocean. And in 2012, there was a massive hurricane called Hurricane Sandy. My family didn't live in the house that I live in today at that time. We lived actually a few miles up. But it's been 13 years, and the pipes are still being fixed, the water pipes, the gas pipes, and our seawall, our version of seawall in Coney Island is NYCHA housing. It's projects. It's a Black and brown community that is being put ostensibly like as the barrier before it hits the rest of Brooklyn. Coney Island is also home to one of the last gated communities in Brooklyn. And the gated community has a different quality of beach, a different access to resources than the rest. It is also now home to a lot of old homes. I think that's the technical term, where people with mental illnesses or folks that cannot afford to be on a really expensive old home are living through subsidized government funding. And so when I say the most vulnerable communities are in front of the climate crisis, this is what I see with my own eyes every single day when I leave my house. And that's why I started being engaged in the climate movement and the climate crisis, because everywhere I looked, it didn't matter if I was in the United States, it didn't matter if I was in Pakistan. When you don't have enough money and power to stand up, you are expendable. And that expendability of these people around me bothered me a great deal. So I started mobilizing with my friends.
That's an incredibly powerful story, and I commend you for having the courage to come and make sure that we represent those communities in everything in the work that we do and keep them top of mind. I would just be interested to hearing from you a little bit more. You've really been working to support frontline communities, to support the youth movement. Mm-hmm. What kind of support do we as an institution and this room, who represent a whole cast of characters and different contributors to this, how can we help elevate this more? How can we help get action moving on this important topic?
Yeah. So one of the questions that I'm often asked is like, why would supporting, funding the youth movement actually result in anything if all you guys are doing is protesting? And I'd like to really elaborate on that. In 2015, when the Paris Climate Agreement was established, we were headed toward a world by 2030 that would be around 4 degrees of warming. Through the advocacy of small island states, the youth movement, and grassroots movements, we established a threshold of 1.5 degrees of warming. That is an incredible victory. Last year, again, because of the youth climate movement, who was lobbying in simultaneous with the fossil fuel industry at the COP, and working very closely in alliance with the states demanding a loss and damage fund, we helped achieve the victory of a loss and damage finance fund that was thought to be near impossible. In fact, I had ministers of state come up to us and be like, it's not going to happen. Until the very last day of negotiations, countries in the global north were saying it will not happen. But the island states, Pakistan, and the youth movement stood their ground, and we achieved a loss and damage fund. On March 23rd, just a couple of weeks ago, 16 youth from the University of South Pacific in Fiji worked with the state of Vanuatu to get the International Court of Justice to write an opinion on human rights and climate change. And they got that passed to the General Assembly with 192 states, all in favor. This will change all legal dynamics for fighting the climate crisis. Because once the International Court of Justice recognizes states' responsibilities in terms of human rights to the climate crisis, we have a precedent set that we have never had before. That is another victory. The youth movement, although in the front looks like all we're doing is protesting, is acting very strategically through litigation, through policy, through international negotiations. And that is why supporting the youth movement is incredibly important. And I'm starting off with victories to also share with you, these have been the victories of our past 10 years, past decade, but the youth movement receives only 0.76% of all international philanthropy monies to support it. Of that 0.76%, majority goes to the youth movement in the United States and the global north, including Europe. If those funds were given to young people organizing in Asia, young people organizing in Africa, young people organizing in the Pacific Islands, we would change the course of mitigating the climate crisis. So, what does the youth movement need? At this stage in time, we also need political strategy, and we need political strategists. Most of what we've learned and most of what I've learned has been ad hoc. We are learning on the job. Somebody gives you a badge to go to COP, and you teach yourself how negotiations work. I promise you that's what I did. I watched YouTube videos. And then another thing that, it's been my ethos in every place I go, I bring a friend with me. Always a plus one, so they can learn with us. But see, most of the leaders that you are looking at today, we are self-taught. And it is coming from a place of need, necessity, and responsibility to our communities, but also because there do not exist mechanisms to get the information to people who need it. And the reason why I'm saying this is important, we are under the wrong impression that Stanford University, Columbia University, and all of these institutions, academic institutions in the global north will bring us the solutions to the climate crisis. They might technically, in terms of technology and bioengineering, But the experts the world needs are those that are experiencing the climate crisis, which again is why I'm pointing to the 1.5, because that language came out of the Pacific Islands. Loss and damage came out of the Pacific Islands. The victory was led by AOSIS and G77. So even political and strategic imagination, it cannot come from institutions that are not, and academics and people and scientists that are not experiencing the climate crisis. They need to come from the people experiencing it because they can articulate what we need. And articulation is also incredibly important. From the time of Martin Luther King to President Noam Chomsky to Naomi Klein, people who take ideas and articulate them in technical manners are the people that can help us get to solutions. So the youth movement also needs the resources to get strategic. And the way we can do that is through funding, and then lastly, I would argue most importantly, we have mechanisms to help people who are investing in projects in renewable energies. We have mechanisms to help people who are investing in projects of biodiversity preservation. We have mechanisms of resourcing and helping NGOs build. We do not have mechanisms, and this is a ask and also like a insight that I want to share with you, to help people stuck in emergency situations through activism. The climate activism that the youth who are doing in the Global South is a target on most of our backs. My friends, and by friends I mean people who I love and care deeply for, have been arrested for writing a tweet on the internet saying that a government should not kill farmers. Another friend of mine was stuck in Sudan just recently, and she served as a youth advisor to the UN Secretary General like I do today. And there was no mechanism of getting them out. So the very people in the front lines who are doing this work of helping the planet, standing up for the planet, there are no emergency systems of monetary aid for them. And the work we do, I think, on a very surface level looks more like it's on communications. It looks like it's about mobilizing people. I really want to articulate it is dangerous. And it's not because what we're doing is wrong or bad. It's because we're challenging power. And we really need to develop a system to help those people do their work better, because no time in history has power not fought back. And all of the world leaders that we point to, that we love to quote, that we applaud, that we like memorialize, their work wasn't a road of just safety and without obstruction and danger. It was dangerous.
I could ask you questions all day. I think it's really helpful for us all to get a deeper understanding of the work that you've been doing, of what the youth movement and the communities that you're bringing together. I'd be curious to know from your perspective, because this past 10 years, we've seen a lot of progress. There's still so much more to do. And I understand the resourcing that is needed. I'd love to know, what do the next 10 years look like? What's on your horizon? What's giving you hope? Where do you want to see opportunities be pushed forward in a more deliberate way?
That's a wonderful question. In the next 10 years, from my understanding, the research I'm doing and the specific niche work, I'm working on human rights litigation and also on the rights of future generations. And I'd like to plant this seed in your head for all of you that are in the room. The law exists, and constitutionally, rights exist when they are written down and articulated. And one of the issues that we have come up again and again in the climate space is we are talking about a future. We're talking about things that haven't happened yet. And working in reverse is really difficult if things have not happened yet. But the very victims of this crisis are also children yet unborn. The whole issue is, what kind of world are we leaving for generations to come? The law says nothing about the rights of future generations. Courts have not been able to clearly articulate what our responsibility is to children yet unborn. And this is for all of us. How incredibly game-changing would it be if we were able to establish that? If we are able to establish that, then it opens many avenues of advocacy on A, phasing out of fossil fuel, B, on states' responsibility to these citizens, children, and children unborn, C, protecting and ensuring a healthy environment, and D, the human rights implications. In the United States, constitutionally, the rights of Black people were not mentioned. Constitutionally, the rights of women were not mentioned. Constitutionally, the rights of children were not mentioned until advocacy came and protested and marched and demanded it. We, as a species, are coming to a world where we need to establish what the rights of our future generations are, and I think in the next 10 years, that is what we should be working towards. And that's what I'm working towards.
I will hold on my, can I ask one more question? Is that okay? Okay. This work is really hard. I mean, that is the key takeaway I think all of us have in this room, and listening to you, it's even harder from where you are. What is the fuel? What is the hope that drives you forward every single day?
It's a good question. I'm asked it, and sometimes I say a very hopeful response because I don't want to ruin the vibe in the room. And
Go for it. Just be for real.
I'm looking around, and I think this room can handle some honesty. I have to go back to my aunts and uncles and cousins and update them after I do things like this. And then they ask me, okay, Ayisha, what has this changed for us? And seldom the answer is anything. And that's what keeps me going, because I have people I'm answerable to. At the same time, in doing all of this work with money and power and standing up to it, I suppose, I've also realized that most of what we really need is free. It's so simple. It's so utterly simple. In order to live a happy and I suppose, fulfilled life, really what you need is some food, shelter, and peace. And so many parts of the world don't have that. For me, fighting for a livable planet is the intersection of all of these issues. And each one of us, including myself, will love somebody born in the year 2100. I know this sounds very much like a soundbite, but when that time comes and when my time comes, I would like to look my children in the eye and tell them I did my absolute best. And I would like to tell my community I did my absolute best. We often look back at history and say, you know, if I was alive in the civil rights movement, I would have stood up. If I was alive during the AIDS movement, I would have stood up. If I was alive during the Salt March and during the apartheid movement, I would have stood up. Well, the biggest crisis of our time is here, and it's asking you what you will do and what you are doing, and postulating and articulating what you would have done in the past is not enough. What are you doing right now? How are you solving it? If not answerable to your community or to your children, how are you answerable to yourself?
Thank you for those powerful messages. And thank you for all that you are doing. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for the few extra minutes.